Welcome back. I'm Roger. You're at Limits Edge Machine Works. Today we're putting back together that Acura CG manual transmission that we took apart in one of our earlier videos. So if you haven't seen that, go back and check that video out so you can see how we got here. So let's get into this. I've got some lathe work and then we're done with the prep and we'll be right back into assembly. Okay, so the last of the prep work that we're doing is to smooth this shaft out where the hub had gotten hot and spun and welded. You can see it isn't the smoothest yet, and I don't want that new hub to swell, wear wrong. We're also going to polish the pilot's snout here. Now the key to doing this is to set your lathe to ludicrous speed, move slow and apply light pressure, and remain alive throughout the process. That's much better. I'm very much still alive. I want to give you a shot here of all of the bad parts that we're pulling out, except for the synchronizers. They were in good shape and I've saved those in a spare pile. But we're putting new ones in. That's fifth gear, or what used to be a gear. There's no teeth on it anymore. It would have mated with this one. And here's the fourth set. The first new seal that we're going to install is here on your shift input, and I wanted to show you that you don't necessarily need to remove this shift input to install a new seal. You can slide it over. In doing so though, you want to make sure that this is smooth and that there's no corrosion here, which there almost always is. And if you need to, go ahead and pull it out. I try not to because there's a tricky trapped detent ball and spring in here. So it engages these to lock you into position so you can feel the shifter moving. And if I move that rail all the way out, the spring and ball that's doing that, now they're not engaged right now, I've got it out of position. But if I were to continue to move the rail out of position and pull it out so I could smooth it up, the spring and the ball there would pop out and go bouncing off my forehead and fly underneath the workbench with the spiders. And I really just don't, I'm tired of playing that game at this stage. So I'm going to leave it in here and we're going to shine this up. And I'll show you how you can do that. So we're going back to installing that new seal here and cleaning up that corrosion. What you have to do to move this shaft out this far so you can clean that up is to take this, which is down in here, you take the bolts out, slide that back, pull that piece out, set it aside. Don't go far enough that the spring and the ball fly out. But you can go on out to about here, and you just get some nice emery cloth. Oh, sorry that took a little bit there. Not only was the shaft a little rusty, but so am I. Alright, now I've just put some grease on here. I put some grease on the inside of that seal. I felt that and there's no roughness to it at all. So you can slide that down there. And now I've got a piece of pipe that fits the outer diameter of it. That's about as far as they go in there. They don't drive all the way in flat. That pocket's not that deep. And that's it. Now, I'll tilt this back up and get a better shot, and we'll see how to put that back together. Okay, what we've got here are the detent slots for that spring and ball that are down under here, and that shaft that we replaced the seal on that goes here. And we're going to push the whole thing back in, but before we do, it's a good idea to go ahead and put a little lube on those. We've got the piece that we're going to have to bolt back on the rail ready, because it's going to come out here. I want to turn it so that the cutouts are on the bottom. And you can see here, the rails got that bolt hole ready. We've got everything in place now, we just slide it all together. There, you see it jump into place? It's in the first detent slot. I'm going to go ahead and put it into the neutral slot. There. Now everything that you're putting together inside of a transmission I think is a good idea, or an engine. Anywhere where you're not going to be able to get to it later, and if it falls and gets loose, then it's going to ruin your day. Put a little thread locker on it. I actually had to shift it into a position to get enough room to be able to tighten that bolt. And the bolt screws into the shift rail, so if it goes in, it's in the right spot. Next thing we're going to put in is the oil baffle. This guy diverts oil into the shaft, goes into the bottom and sits into a recess. I'm putting a little more of that lube on this bearing before I stick it in there. Pay attention to things that matter, like these two cutouts. They're not on the back side here. And this is a kind of a case where it's an exception to the rule. Ordinarily the rule is on bearings, if you don't know how they go in and out, the writing and the part number goes out, where if you had to view it you could see it. So it just makes, you know, working on things easier, and most engineering is done that way. As a matter of fact, if there's a snap ring groove or a feature that you have to be able to access, the part numbers will also be printed on the side that you can see. In this case, the part numbers are going to be down, these two holes are going up, and that would be so that I think it can get some additional oil feed. But that's how the old one was, and that's how we're going to put the new one back in. Now it had an oil diverting baffle that we'll put back in. More Loctite on the screws. On the plate here, it has spots to peen those and lock them in. Next, we're going to install these bearings on the differential. While it might be better to use the press, the theme of the show and the channel here is how I can show you guys how you can do it at home. So we're going to tap these on. And these bearings are robust enough that this isn't going to hurt them. And go as far as you can. Make sure that you're centered and flat before you start trying to go side to side. Use a soft punch so that you don't chip a race. And then stay as close to the inside edge and go straight down as you can. You'll be able to tell if you need to jump back and forth if it's tight, but a lot of the times if you've started straight, it's going to go all the way on. And you hear that? It bounces. It's down. If it likes to jump up, give it a light tap. What you don't want to do is this on the race. Not that you can't get away with it. Not that I haven't done it. It's better to use soft things. Like these are aluminum. This is non-hardened mild steel. That's down. I also want to pre-lube the differential gears because of washing all of these parts. There's no lubricant inside. I would disassemble this ordinarily to do this and inspect these gears further, but this unit has a spring-loaded internal locker that takes kind of a set of pins to lock it back together, and you have to fight the springs and everything. It's just not worth it. I looked through there with a good light. All the gears are in good shape. Everything does what it's supposed to. We're just going to put it back together. I looked through in here and looked at the splines as well. They're in good shape. Okay. Now I'd like to think that you could go ahead and set this in the case, but we're going to wait and go ahead and assemble the shafts, because I think everything has to go back in together, like at the same time together. What we've got here knolled out are the two shafts. Here's the pictures in case you need them. I downloaded those from the place that I've got the diagrams and the parts from. We're putting our first synchronized gear set on here. And make sure you've got that gap underneath that synchro ring. Don't let it sit. If it's sitting flat down on there, remember it's too worn out to use. Or that goes down. And you want these unique ones in the middle. Then before you go any further, make sure that goes into gear and drags and makes friction on that gear it's trying to engage. So it should get hard to turn and then lock down. Yep. And pop back up and release. So it goes from being easy to turn, hard to turn when you push on that slider, and it engages by hand. Now we can move on to the next gear. We've got an inner race here. Again, on this surface where the synchro engages, I've scuffed it up with some memory cloth, but just very lightly. And this one's backwards, so you have to put your synchro brass cone blocking ring in first. And line those protrusions up with the slots they go in. You want to do the same thing but backwards. Pull up as you turn and make sure that gear gets some drag on it before it goes in. working quite well. Next gear, spline's on, but it is a thrust surface, so make sure that you lubricate that thrust surface. And you can tell that's the thrust surface because it's much wider. It's got 4 slots for oil to get into it. And earlier on the teardown video, we notated that we had 3 grooves facing up. Interestingly, in the teardown video, I also notated that this gear was installed with the 3 grooves facing up, but the diagram shows it quite clearly. 3 grooves towards the spacer. We'll put it together like that and keep an eye on it. I'm going to wait right there and not stake that because we want to set our intermediate case on and make sure everything is working. That concludes that shaft. Now another discrepancy that I've notated from the teardown video and the diagrams is that this bearing, this flat washer was on the inside on teardown. The diagram shows it on the outside. We'll do it like the diagram shows. And that's just something to be aware of when you're building transmissions and doing this kind of work. That they're not always built right when you get to them. Especially the older they are and the more times they've been gone through, the more you'll find that's the case. And when that does happen to you, keep an eye on that and just go with your gut. Okay, we've got the snap ring that goes here. Nice and snug. Okay, first thing we have going on, the bearing, needle bearing. Back of that gear acts like a thrust surface. We'll put a little lube on it. Lube our clutching teeth and our synchro surface, our thrust surface, our bearing surface. Synchro rings next. Hubs next. Okay, it's working just like it should. Okay, our next gear is going on. Now we've got our bearing and that inner race. I'm going to keep that captured so that I don't drive that race down onto that needle bearing and ruin it. Move your finger before it starts to get too tight. Now they all happen to line up. I'm glad we put that shine on that earlier. That felt just about right going back together. Now that's still working just fine. put a little bit of light oil inside the main races here. Oh, well, we got to put a seal in here before we get too much further too. I forgot about that input seal. I want to show you one trick on seals. There's a spring inside of a seal. I don't know if you know about this guy or not. See if I can get him out without hurting him. Okay. A lot of people knock this spring loose when they're putting the seal in, and they don't realize it. And it falls down there and can bind up, get in between things, cause a leak. It's definitely not going to seal. If you want to prevent that real easily, pack a little grease in this cavity when you're going together on anything that bounces or anyone that's hard to install. And if that spring starts to bounce out, it'll bounce into that grease and it'll go right back where it's supposed to be. You won't have that trouble anymore. Now I'm going to try to cheat, but I don't think I'm going to get away with it. We'll try to just set this in here. Put a little lube in your shift rail holes. I'm going to try to stab these. I've got them held just like they sit. Okay, so that slid together relatively easily actually. I guess I probably should have waited. I was going to try to, I said in my last video I was going to try to show you how this thing works. We'll see if we can get a shot of it. This is going to be extremely hard. Okay, the whole principle and operation here is this guy, this yoke moves this way and this way. I'll try to demonstrate that. It's going to be hard. So he rotates this way, and he goes this way, and back the other. And you notice it kind of jumps. Those are those detents I was talking about. They make it, that's what you feel when you feel the shifter in a car and it bounces back to neutral. It's springs and balls jumping down into little grooves. And they're all over the place. Okay, so this is what the shifter is hooked to, your hand. That's what's moving when you move your hand back and forth and in and out. This guy, this is what translates that motion of your hand into movement of the shift rails so that it selects a gear. So we'll install it now. I think we'll need these to get her going. This is a bearing retainer that holds this bearing on. I think before I put that in, okay, I've got that inner bearing retainer there on, and I'm going to start putting a little bit of Loctite on these bolts. That bearing plate has notches cut in it to lock the bolts. Alright, now we can go back and put this guy in. And when you're putting it down, you've got to watch that the two pieces that intersect the yoke go into place, and they did. We've got two long bolts and a short bolt. The short bolt goes in the inside there. And again, we'll Loctite them. And these don't have spots to lock those. Now you may be asking yourself, Roger, I see you talking about the rotation of the shaft and the yoke at the bottom and how that translates to shift rail movement, but I don't see anything going from this piece to this piece. Well, that's where this next offer comes in. If you wait, I'm going to throw this guy in if you just pay shipping and handling. But we've got to put one more in. This is the one that goes up for overdrive later. It's going to go into this slot here. Now this gear is reversed. I actually missed a piece. Hopefully one of you guys caught that. I was about to say in the comments down below, Roger, you missed a piece. That thing ain't going to shift. So this is the finger that goes inside there and moves each rail up and down. Trust me, that's the thing about this. Don't be worried if you're putting stuff together at the house, or don't think that this stuff's overwhelming and it's the end of the world if you do it wrong. It's generally not. You just test it as you go and audit yourself as you go. And you won't get more than about one step ahead before you catch it. Okay, now I've managed to get all the pieces in there, the rod's all the way down. I've oiled up the detents here, here, the top of the rails. And then I've gone ahead and wiped this surface off with a clean rag and some acetone. This is the case half that goes on next. I'm going to spray this surface with some high tack gasket prep, and I'd like to keep all of the oil and things in there, so I'm not going to put any in here. As I go up and down, I don't want it to drip on the gasket surface. I'm gonna wipe some of that excess off. Alright, now these are ready to set together. Well, I've learned not to argue with it. So the trick to getting those all to go down is to have everything loose still. Take the bearings, don't have the bearings in there when you're going back together with the case halves. Then jiggle up and down on the shafts and on the shift rails and tap around that differential case bearing and everything should just ease together. Now I'm just going to tighten these real easy. In a crisscross pattern. Now I go back around with my hands and just make sure those are snug. Now these are the ones that have the internal snap rings in the case, if you'll remember. It feels like I'm able to sit right down on that snap ring readily, so it should go easy. Yeah, see, no real big deal there. And it pops down in that groove. This is the overdrive gear set on the outside here. I've got the other race. Okay, so we've got both of our bearings in there now. They've snap rings, have grabbed them and secured them to the case. That gear goes on, the collar down. We want our next bearing race. Some lube. I lube the bearings real well too. We've got a needle bearing. We've got our new overdrive gear. Our Synchro Hub. There's a little notch that was cut on this on disassembly. It corresponds with the notch here. It's where somebody's taken a cutoff wheel and just marked them. On this, the fork has to go in together. Shoot a little oil on the fork ears there. It's a left hand or backwards thread here. We've got a roll pin that secures this fork to this rail. I'm going to go ahead and put the detent plungers in. They go here, here, and here. I like to put a little shot of oil on the spring, and even though we've already oiled the rails, I like to put a little down in there in the base of that. I'll pop the ball in where I can set it on there. That's going to hold all the shift rails into, or all of the, all the shift rails into one of their positions. Okay, at this point we should have a transmission that shifts and does its thing. I'll show you how you check it out. You're going to need to be able to turn the input shaft and watch the output and shift it. Shifting is done here. Here's the input, here's the output. Right now I want neutral. That tells me I have neutral. Spins easy. I can turn the input shaft. The output shaft doesn't have to turn, and the input doesn't have to turn. So neutral works. It's always a good sign. That should be first gear. Now I can't turn these two separately of each other. They're locked. That's perfect. Now if I go straight forwards, that should be second gear. Okay. Go back to neutral. That should be third. That would be fourth. Fifth. That should reverse rotation here. Get a lot faster. That shifts through all the gears. Alright guys, well, we've wrapped up rebuilding the transmission here. We've got all the covers on and everything. I've ran it through several times, both directions, shifted it through all the gears, spun the differential in neutral, and made sure everything works like it should, and it does. And now we're going to give it a little coat of paint. You want to make sure that you tape up everything. I need to get some tape on this shifter. Likewise, if you're ever in a pinch and in the last stages of a paint job like that, you can just grease it up too. Because paint won't stick to grease. And then you can just wipe it off when you're done. And there it is, that wraps it up. We'll let that dry. Thanks for tuning in. If you haven't already done so, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment below on anything you'd like to see in the future. Really appreciate all the viewership. Thank you guys.